How's it going, everyone? My name is Dieugirl, and welcome back to Book 2, Into the Light. Last time we left off, Harry, Ron, and Tiff had interrogated, while under the influence of the Polyjuice Potion, had interrogated Draco Malfoy about what he knew about the Chamber of Secrets, which was surprisingly little. Now, let's continue on with the story. Part 3. Uncle Tom's Diary. "Have you spoken to Hermione?" Ron asked Harry a few days later. Besh listened behind them as Tiffany tried to teach Tina how to say Tarkama. Tar-ka-ma. Tar-ka-mi. Naga, sis. Tar-ka-ma. Tar-ka-ka. Ugh, I give up. Suddenly, the two bumped into Harry and Ron, who were standing in a puddle of water. "What's this?" Harry asked them, and the two of them took off, with Tiffany, Besh, and Tina close behind. "Ugh," said Ron, as the water got an inch thicker. "Looks like Moaning Myrtle's flooded the bathroom," said Harry. Soon the five found themselves in Moaning Myrtle's bathroom. Water was pouring out of the toilets, sinks, and faucets. Harry pointed, and the four looked up to see Moaning Myrtle sitting near the skylight, crying. "Come to throw something else at me?" she said defiantly through her tears. "Why would we throw something at you?" Besh asked curiously. "Don't ask me. Here I am, minding my own business, and someone thinks it's funny to throw a book at me," she said in a pitiful voice. But it can't hurt if someone throws something at you. It will just go right through you," said Ron. Apparently, this was quite the wrong thing to say. Enraged, Myrtle zipped down. "Sure!" she roared. "Let's all throw books at Myrtle because she can't feel it. 5 points if you get it through her stomach." To emphasize, Myrtle thrust her fist through Ron's torso. He looked positively terrified. 10 points if it goes through her head!" Myrtle shouted, thrusting her ghostly fist through Ron's head. "Who threw it at you, anyway?" asked Besh. "I don't know," said Myrtle, calming down. "I didn't see them. I was sitting in the U-bend, thinking about death." Here Myrtle sighed blissfully. "And it fell through the top of my head." Nodding, she broke into sobs again and floated off. "Ika! Ika!" Tanissa said, tugging on her sister's sleeve. Tina ran over, picked it up, and handed it to Harry. "Myrtle book! Myrtle book!" she said, pointing at the book, then at the sobbing ghost hanging above them. "Myrtle book?" asked Ron, confused. "She means that's the book that was thrown at Myrtle," Tristina said, moving closer to look at it. "Eeh!" said Tanissa, nodding furiously. "Myrtle book!" she repeated, happy to finally be able to say something in English. "Nothing to get excited over, Tina," said Harry, flipping through the pages. "There's nothing written in here." Besh frowned and reached out for the diary, which Harry handed over somewhat reluctantly, as though he already thought of it as his property. Flipping through the pages, Besh said aloud, "It can't really be blank. I mean, it must have been important if it's as old as it is. It says it's 50 years old. Diaries don't last this long unless there's something important was in them. What's more, it must have contained something bad for someone to have tried to flush it down a toilet." "Or maybe you're just looking far too into this," Hermione said, and Besh, looking up, saw that Harry and Ron seemed to agree. He shrugged. "Whatever. Maybe I am. In any case, let's go back to the tower before someone finds us here, with us making all this noise." A few hours later, Hermione said, "Besh, Harry, Ron, Tiff, Tina, and I are headed to bed." They had been poring over the diary since they had gotten back to Gryffindor Tower. Hermione had tried every revealing spell she knew, and Besh rubbed the pages with a revealer, a red eraser that did the exact opposite of what it looked like. Still, nothing showed. The only thing they had learned was that the diary belonged to someone named Tom Marvolo Riddle. The mention of that name had caused Tiff to grab her head. Besh simply nodded and said, "Good night, Hermione, Tiff, Bwenkidika, Tina." After the girls had left, Ron said, "Mates, I'm headed for bed too. I'm beat." This time it was Harry who nodded in response, as Besh had suddenly gotten an idea. Taking the diary from Harry gently, he opened it to the first page and picked up a quill. "What are you doing?" Harry asked as Ron trudged up the stairs. "This is a diary, right, Harry?" Besh asked. When Harry nodded slowly, Besh continued, "Well, then why not use it for the purpose for which it was made?" With that, he dipped the quill in ink and wrote down "Hello" on the paper. The two second years watched as the ink seeped into the page, and Besh started to flip the page when Harry said, "Besh, look!" He watched as the word "Hello" reappeared on the page in long, flowing script. Harry grabbed his own quill and wrote down, "My name is Harry Potter." Before Besh could ask what Harry was doing, the words disappeared and there appeared on the page the words, "Hello, Harry Potter. My name is Tom Riddle." "Hurry, Besh, write down who you are," Harry said. "We may be able to find something out, now that we've figured out how to work this diary." Besh sighed and wrote, "And my name is Besh Tykos." The words disappeared, and the words, "Hello, Belisi Overachel. My name is Tom Riddle." Besh snarled and picked up the book, but Harry asked, "Besh, who's Belisi?" Growling, Besh replied, "My true name. The one no one outside my family is supposed to know." "But why?" "My people are bound by a curse, Harry. For my sake, I can't tell you what that curse is." Harry frowned, but nodded and took the book back and wrote, "Do you know anything about the Chamber of Secrets?" saying it out loud as he did so. After a second, the word "yes" appeared. Dipping his quill again, Besh wrote, "Can you tell us?" They waited, and then the word "no" appeared. Besh was about to pick up the diary and toss it into the flames, but more words reappeared. "But I can show you. Let me take you back 50 years ago." Suddenly, the pages flapped as though caught in a whirlwind and stopped about halfway through the book. In one corner, the words 15th of June, 1942 appeared, and in the crease of the pages, a light began to shine. It got bigger and bigger until Besh and Harry suddenly found themselves sucked into the diary. Besh opened his temporarily blinded eyes and waited for his vision to return. When it had, he found himself in Hogwarts in front of a rather handsome student who was looking behind them at a figure at the top of the stairs. Harry turned to look at what the boy was looking at, and Besh asked, "Can you tell us what's going on here?" The boy said nothing in reply. "Are you Tom Riddle?" There was still no answer. Sighing, he turned around and snarled involuntarily. Harry was the only one who seemed to have heard him or reacted. Harry turned around and saw 15-year-old Takama Vegenstroth walking down the stairs. Harry stepped aside, but Takama didn't even seem to notice. Besh quirked an eyebrow and, still growling, stepped towards Takama and swiped the air right behind him. Takama didn't even react. "Hey, bro," Takama whispered, to whom Besh assumed it indeed was Tom Riddle, which meant he was... "Harry, Tom Riddle is Tiff's uncle." Besh said, knowing neither Takama or Tom would hear him. They seemed to be mere spectators, neither seen or heard, but there, nonetheless. Besh and Harry watched as the dialogue between the two of them began to unfold. Besh had done some mental math. If Takama was 55, and this was 40 years ago, then that made Takama a fifth year, and Tom was either a fifth year as well, or sixth or seventh year. You know, I bet Mum's turning in her grave since you took on her maiden name, Tom said, smirking. Ah, who cares? I never did like the old bat anyways. Besides, I don't blame you for taking on that cool nickname. Dad was always He called his father something, his father a name that made Besh frown. The two stopped talking and looked back to the top of the stairs, and Besh and Harry followed suit to see a number of black-robed men carrying a stretcher. Besh could see a small white hand poking out from under the cloth that covered the stretcher. He winced. "Tom, Takama," a voice said, and Harry turned towards it to see a younger Dumbledore. "You two should not be out this late." "Yes, sir," Takama said. "We just wanted to see if the rumors were true." "Unfortunately, they are, Takama. They are," Dumbledore said sadly. "About the school as well? We have no home to go to, sir. They can't shut down Hogwarts." "I'm afraid, Tom, that Headmaster Tippett may have no choice." "But," Takama said suddenly, "if the person responsible were found, if it all stopped—" He trailed off just as suddenly as he started. Is there something you wish to tell me, Takama?" Dumbledore asked, inspecting him slightly more closely. "No, sir, nothing," Takama said finally, and Dumbledore seemed to accept that. He made a small shooing gesture, and the two teens left, Besh and Harry following, Harry realizing that he had just told Dumbledore the exact same answer a few hours ago. They continued following the two teens until Tom stopped suddenly. "Do you think we should?" began Takama. "Yeah, it's the only way to stop this stuff," said Tom, hurrying down the hall with his brother. Besh and Harry followed Takama and Tom into one of the dungeons, where both pulled out their wands. "Evening, Hagrid," said Tom, throwing open the door. Takama entered, his wand pointed at Hagrid. "Tom, Takama, what are you doing here?" Hagrid's voice asked, a bit younger and less gruff than it was now. "I don't think you meant it to kill anyone. Monsters just don't make good pets, Hagrid," said Takama, scooting to Tom's right side. "Aragog never hurt nobody, never!" Hagrid cried. "The dead girl's parents will be here tomorrow. The least Hogwarts can do is make sure the thing that killed their daughter is slaughtered. Now stand aside, Hagrid," said Tom. "No! Stand aside! No!" "Hand blast attack!" Takama yelled, pointing his palm at the box. A ball of Kai erupted from his hand, and Takama launched it towards the box. The box burst open, and some sort of black creature scuttled out. "Aranya Exime!" Tom shouted. The spell missed the creature and burnt the floor. "Aragog! Aragog!" shouted Hagrid, moving his hand after his friend. Takama pointed his palm at Hagrid, and Tom his wand. "I'm afraid we can't let you go, Hagrid," said Tom. "They'll have your wand for this. You'll be expelled." "Hagrid!" Harry cried as a strange force began to pull backwards. "Hagrid!" Besh and Harry yelled as the white light engulfed them again. They tumbled onto the floor, back into Gryffindor common room. Breathing heavily, Besh said, "No wonder whoever had that diary wanted it gone." Harry didn't reply for a few minutes. "Besh," he said finally, "this means that Tiff is Tom Riddle's niece. How many uncles does Tiff have? Besh gasped. Right, Harry said grimly. That's not the worst of it, though. Besh said next. Hagrid. Hagrid is the heir of Slytherin? I can't believe that. Not Hagrid, of all people. And who or what in the name of Merlin is Aragog? Harry shrugged, and they both just continued to sit there on the floor, thinking about the implications of what they'd just witnessed. It can't be Hagrid. It just can't be, said Hermione when the two boys met with Tiff, Tina, Hermione, and Ron the next morning. We don't even know this Tom Oh, sorry, Tiff. Tiff had groaned and grabbed her head again, wincing in pain. This Tom guy, revised Ron. He sounds like a dirty rotten snitch to me. The monster had killed somebody, Ron, exclaimed Harry. What would any of us have done? Hagrid's our friend, said Hermione. Why don't we just go and ask him about it? Oh, that'll be a cheerful visit, said Besh sarcastically. Hello, Hagrid. Tell us, have you been setting anything Mad and Harry on loose on the castle lately? Mad and Harry? You five wouldn't be talking about me, would you? Hagrid asked, coming up behind them. No, said Harry, Ron, Hermione, and Besh. Naga, said Tiff and Tina at the same time. Anyways, Tristina, I've got something to tell you and Tanissa. The rest of you run along. Hagrid, whatever you've got to tell me and Tina, the others can hear it too, said Tiffany with a spark of bravery. Tiffany then held her head and winced, then shook her head. Sorry, she muttered, blinking. I don't know where that came from. It's all right, Tristina. Come along then, said Hagrid, motioning for them to follow him. The 5 students sat down in various chairs and stools around Hagrid's hut while Hagrid shut the door and drew the curtains. Don't want to be overheard, Hagrid explained. What's all this about, Hagrid? Tiffany asked as Hagrid knelt down in front of her and took her hands in his own. Well, Dumbledore told me, and I feel you have a right to know too. Tristina, have you ever wondered how your mum died? Tristina shook her head, ignoring the pain, then translating for Tina. Tina also shook her head, having never known their mother. Looking around at his audience, Hagrid sighed and began to speak. It all started one night in January, I believe. From what Dumbledore said, your mum, Jessica Fergensroth, sat in a rocking chair, singing a lullaby to you. I'm no great shakes at singing, but Dumbledore says you'll know the words when you... Here, Hagrid nodded to Tiffany's forehead. You'll know 'em later, he finished. Anyway, your mum just finished singing when Takama walked in. Here, Besh barely repressed a growl. Tiffany blinked, shaking her head painfully, then nodded for Hagrid to continue. Goodbye, Jessica, he says, and then he... He killed her? Squeaked Hermione, her eyes filled with tears. Hagrid had seemed to have forgotten that they were there. Not straight off, no, said Hagrid in a choked whisper. Tiffany was sure that if Hagrid squeezed her hands any tighter, he'd crush them. Tortured her first. Hagrid let out a choked sob, as Tiffany's hands began to shake, partly from the pain in her head, partly from the horror in her heart. Your mum, begged Takama to stop, but the ruddy tyrant just kept on. Hagrid made a motion of a wizard casting a spell with his wand. I don't know how many times he cast it, but Dumbledore told me her last words were, "You'll never have Tristina," said Hagrid, beaming with pride at Tiffany, who had crawled into a ball at his hands. Finally, Takama cast the curse one more time and snuffed out her life. Stop! Tiffany screamed, holding her head. Strands of her hair were actually on end, alive with pain. Please stop, she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. It hurts. It hurts so much, Tiffany sobbed, trembling. Please. With one last sob, Tristina collapsed to the floor, unconscious. Besh was surprised when Harry, Ron, Hermione, and Hagrid all looked at him, and Hagrid said, I'm sorry, Besh. I didn't know. Honest, I didn't. He blinked, nodded, and bent down to pick up Tiff. Then he got another idea. In a flash, he had transformed himself into a panther, and looked at Tina, saying, Tina, could you get the others to put Tiff on my back, and keep her there with a binding charm? And then, if you want, you can come with me and Tiff to the hospital wing, so we can get Tiff to come around. Tina nodded, thought hard with her face all scrunched up for a second, then turned to Hermione and said, You put Sis on Besh back, then bind charm do? Hermione looked confused for a second. Suddenly, Ron said, Hermione, she's asking you to put a binding charm on Tiff and Besh. Harry had always stepped forward and bent over. He looked up at Ron and said, Can you get me a bit of help? Ron nodded and walked over, and they both lifted Tiff with small effort and placed her on Besh's back. Then Hermione pulled out her wand and did the binding charm, and Besh walked around a bit. Tiff flopped a little, but she stayed on, satisfied. Besh looked at Tina and said, Thanks. Now, come on. Let's get your sister where Madame Pomfrey can help. The two anthros walked out of Hagrid's cabin after Tina had opened the door, and they got Tiff up to Madame Pomfrey, who just fussed over Tiff's unconsciousness. Madeline, you think no one had any control around here and this Quessa? Madame Pomfrey, it wasn't Hagrid's fault, really, Besh said, trying to felicitate the fussy woman so that she bring Tiff back to consciousness. Madame Pomfrey simply tisked and pointed her wand at Tiff's body and muttered, Innovate! Tiff's eyes popped open, and Besh and Tina grinned. Thanks, Madame Pomfrey, Besh said. No problem at all, dear, Madame Pomfrey said, all smiles. She watched as the three anthros left, and said, once they had closed the door, They will be the death of me. I just know it. You up for a visit to the lake? Besh asked the two Quessa, both of whom nodded. The three of them walked back outside, down to the lake, and there they met Harry, Ron, and Hermione, who were headed back up to the castle, but detoured so that all six of them could hang out around the lake. They had just gotten there and were just watching the water, when suddenly Tiff stumbled forward with a small yelp and fell into the water. Besh turned and saw Malfoy running away. His eyes narrowed and he took off, holding his arms straight behind him so as to reduce the wind drag. He caught up with Malfoy in a little to no time and grabbed his arm, pulling Malfoy forcefully to a stop. What were you thinking? Besh snarled into Malfoy's ear. The boy simply opened his mouth and took a deep breath, but Besh covered the boy's mouth with his tail. Bite me, and I'll knock your teeth out, he growled. Malfoy swallowed and nodded, and Besh said, Now, why did you push Tiff into the lake? Malfoy spit out Besh's tail and spat, Because I can, and she's a dirty stinking Quessa who needed a bath anyway. Fine, Besh said, and picked up Malfoy easily, throwing him over his shoulder like a rag. Ignoring his protests, Besh walked back to the lake, past the other five, and saw that Harry had dived in and saved Tiff. He allowed himself a small smile before he set Malfoy down and grabbed him by the arms. Malfoy instinctively grabbed Besh's forearms, and Besh smirked before he started twirling. Faster and faster he spun, until he let go and Malfoy flew out over the lake, crashing into the water just near the other bank. Well, you're a stinking bigot who needed a bath anyway. Your attitude smelled like fecal matter, Besh called over to Malfoy with a smirk. Then he turned back to Tiff, who had been dried off, and said, Tiff, can you not swim? You look like you were having trouble to me before I went after Malfoy, which, I might add, proved to be highly amusing." Tiffany merely shook her head, muttering, "I hate water. I hate water. I hate water." Tina then bent down and whispered something to Tiffany. Tiffany nodded, and Tina turned to Besh, speaking in Kiesan. "Back at Veggenstraat Manor, Dad used to dunk Tiff in a tank as punishment. So, naturally, Tiff is terrified of water," Tina explained. Besh frowned at the trembling Quessa as Tina whispered words of comfort in her ear. That evening, Besh came downstairs to hear someone crying. Another voice was speaking in a different language, and Besh stopped to listen. "Stupid Malfoy locked me in a dark room. Felt like I was back in solitary confinement," Tina sobbed, hugging her sister. "Sis, you know Malfoy's ego's too big for his body. Besides, remember what happened to Pranky?" Tina sniffed and shook her head, looking at her sister. He poured a bottle of hot sauce in Master Takama's dinner," Tina recalled, smiling. "That's right. When Master found out, he was furious. He put hot sauce in Pranky's gruel for the next week." Tina smiled and laughed a little. "One day," said Tiffany, bending down to her sister's knees. "One day, Malfoy will get something similar, and he'll learn his lesson just like Pranky did." Tina's face suddenly grew scared. "You aren't going to put hot sauce in his food, are you?" she asked. Tiffany merely laughed. "Nah, I think Besh has already taught him enough about messing around with Veggenstrauts." "Yeah, but it was a wet lesson." Tiffany merely chuckled at Tina's corny joke. Besh snorted himself, and figured he might as well make his presence fully known. So he did, stepping into the room, saying, "Well, hello there, Quessa twins. Here comes me." He stopped and frowned at the sight of Tina's face, which still bore tear streaks. "Hey, Tina, we can exact retribution on Malfoy any time you want," Besh said with a mock evil grin. "But actually," he said, suddenly switching to English, "I was wondering if you two wanted to go talk to Hagrid with me. I need to talk to Hagrid, and since Harry, Ron, and Hermione are busy doing something with charms, I figured I'd ask you two. It's what we originally were going to talk to Hagrid about, before he disclosed what he did." Besh faltered, mainly to keep Tiff's memorization field from making a nuisance of itself. "We go talk Hagrid?" Tina asked. "Repeat after me, Tina. Ready? We are going to talk. Naga, Tina. Going to talk. Close enough. To Hagrid. Right. We are going to talk to Hagrid. We'll work more on it later. But you're coming along great, Tina-chan. Honest. Now, come on. We need to see if Hagrid really did set Aragog loose. I still don't think it was him." The looks on Tiff and Tina's faces told Besh they thought the same. The three Anthros walked outside, headed for Hagrid's cabin, and nearly crashed into the very half-giant they were looking for in the great hall. "Oh, hey there, Besh, Tiff, Tina," said Hagrid, smiling at each of them in turn. "Hi, Hagrid," Tina said brightly, and Besh grinned. "She'll be speaking as well as the rest of us in no time," he thought, before the grin slid off his face. "Hagrid, we need to talk to you," he said, and Hagrid's smile turned to a look of confusion, and Besh suddenly really didn't want to ask Hagrid about it, so he quickly changed the subject. We just wanted to know." "Mandrakes," Tina supplied, and Besh and Tiff both nodded. "Right. How are the mandrakes going?" Besh said, thankful that Tina was able to think so quickly. "Oh, the mandrakes are going swimmingly," Hagrid said, the smile returning. Professor Sprout says they've got a bit of growing up to do yet, but once their acne's cleared up, we'll chop 'em up and stew 'em, and get those people in the hospital wing unpetrified. And you three, along with the others," he said meaningfully, "need to look after yourselves, and keep an eye on your sister, Tiff." Suddenly, Neville came running to over where they were. "Besh, Tina, Tiff, Harry said to come quick. We don't know who did it, but come on." The three animalesque teenagers had already started running towards Gryffindor Tower. "Bye-bye, Hagrid," Tina called as they ran. When they got into the dorm, they saw a scene of complete chaos. "Harry, if you wanted to do some remodeling, you should have asked for our help. Or consent," Besh said with a smirk. "Shut up, Besh. You aren't helping," Harry snapped, laughing in spite of himself and searching frantically for something. "Harry," Besh said, suddenly scared. "It's gone," Harry said grimly as he straightened. "They found it. Tom Riddle's diary is gone." "Now if we work our plan right, Hufflepuff doesn't stand a chance," said Wood, as Tiffany, Harry, Besh, and the rest of the Gryffindor Quidditch team listened to his game plan. "We're stronger, faster, and smarter," said Wood as he led the Gryffindor team out to the Quidditch pitch. "And they're dead scared that Harry'll petrify them if they fly anywhere near him," said Fred jokingly. Tiff and Besh glared daggers at him. "Yeah, that too," said Wood, smiling slightly. As they were climbing up the short stairwell to the Quidditch pitch, Professor McGonagall came up to them holding a scroll. "This match has been cancelled." "You can't cancel Quidditch," said Wood, shocked. "Silence, Wood. You and your teammates will return to Gryffindor Tower immediately. Tristina, Harry, Besh, you three and I will find Mr. Weasley. There's something the four of you need to see. Now, I warn you, this could be a wee bit of a shock," said Professor McGonagall as she led them into the hospital wing. On two beds were two girls. One had silver hair, her fur was a pale grey, and her tail was sticking out beside her, quills extended. "Tina!" Tiffany gasped, rushing to her sister's side. On the second bed was a human girl with curly brown hair and shocked blue eyes. "Hermione!" Harry gasped. "They were found next to the library, along with this," Professor McGonagall asked, showing the mirrors to Tiffany, Besh, Ron, and Harry. "Does this mean anything to any of you?" she asked. "No," Harry whispered. Tiffany merely shook her head, her eyes returning to the petrified Tina. Tiffany gently placed her gloved hand on top of Tina's frozen hand and gripped it sadly. Tiffany then placed her head on her gloved hand and her shoulders jerked suddenly. Besh could only place a hand on her shoulder as Tiffany wept for her sister. Besh masked his own emotions so as to be able to comfort Tiff and not add to the hysteria. He turned the crying Quessa around and hugged her, purring as he did so. "This paralyzing thing just became top priority," he told her. "Due to recent events, these rules will be put into effect immediately," Professor McGonagall said to the Gryffindors in the common room, after telling them the other heads of house were telling their students the same thing. "All students are to report to the common room by 6 p.m., and all students will be chaperoned between classes by a teacher. No exceptions," she continued, allowing the scroll to snap back into its roll. Her face became even sadder as she said, "I must tell you that unless the student responsible for these attacks is caught, Hogwarts may very well be closed." With that, she left the common room, but Besh heard a sniff coming from her as she did so. The second she left, Harry turned to Ron, Tiff, and Besh, saying, "We have to go talk to Hagrid. I still don't believe it's him who's doing it, but at the very least, if he did open it last time, he'll know where it is, for a start." Besh sighed and nodded. Harry was right, no matter how much Besh wished it weren't so. "But Harry, you heard McGonagall," Ron said, and Besh turned on him, fangs bared slightly. "Ron, Hermione and Tina have been paralyzed. We're going to find out how to fix them. You can come along or not. It doesn't matter. Tiff, Harry said, I think it's time to get our invisibility cloaks out. Besh smirked and said, I couldn't agree more. Tristina and Harry had inherited only one thing from their parents, 2 invisibility cloaks. The special thing about these cloaks was that they could see each other through them, but no one could see them by the naked eye alone. Tristina draped hers over herself and Besh, and Harry draped his over himself and Ron. Tiffany shivered slightly chilled without her sister beside her. Smiling at Besh to let him know she was all right, she then waved to test that Ron could see her and Besh, and Ron waved back to test that Tiffany and Besh could see him and Harry. The 4 Gryffindors then trooped out of Gryffindor Tower towards Hagrid's hut. When the 4 arrived at Hagrid's hut, Hagrid greeted them with a crossbow. What's that for? asked Harry as Tiffany and Besh took off Tiffany's cloak. I was expecting, began Hagrid, smiling nervously. Never mind. Come in. Just made a pot of tea. Hagrid's hands shook terribly as he poured the hot tea into the cup, overflowed it, and spilled it into the saucer. Hagrid? Tristina asked gently. Are you all right? She carefully approached him and, despite his protests, began to help pour the tea. Yeah, I'm fine, he stammered, handing the kettle to Tristina so she could finish pouring. Did you hear about Hermione and Tina? Besh asked. Tiffany's hands shook slightly as Besh mentioned Tina's name, and Besh looked at her apologetically. Yeah, said Hagrid somberly, gazing sorrowfully at Tristina, who was cleaning up the tea around the saucer. Hagrid, we have to ask you. Harry looked nervously at Ron. Do you know who's opened the Chamber of Secrets? Hagrid heaved a deep sigh and set the kettle down on the table. What you have to know about that is... Fang barked as someone knocked on the door. Quick, under the cloak, Hagrid whispered, picking up Tiffany and Besh and setting them on his bed. You 2 hide over here. Don't make a sound, whispered Hagrid. Tiffany nodded and pulled her invisibility cloak over herself and Besh. Besh crouched and flashed into a house cat, curling up in Tiff's arms and being extremely happy that the cloak masked the flash that accompanied his transformations. He lay perfectly still and silent except for the twitch of his tail as Hagrid opened the door to let in Albus Dumbledore and a man the teens would later learn would be Cornelius Fudge, Minister of Magic. Oh, Professor Dumbledore, sir, said Hagrid, lowering his bow once again. Besh and Tristina tried to keep themselves calm as Hagrid allowed the 2 men inside. Bad business, Hagrid. Very bad business. 2 attacks on Muggle Bonds. 1 attack on one of the Weggenstraw twins. Things have gone far enough. The Ministry's got to act, Fudge said. But I never... You know I never, Professor, Hagrid said, his eyes wide with fear. Dumbledore nodded serenely and turned to the other 2 men. I want it known, Cornelius, that Hagrid has my full confidence, said Dumbledore. Dumbledore, Hagrid's record is against him. I've got to take him, said Cornelius with a sad look on his face. Take him? Take him where? Besh wondered, tail twitching as he scratched one ear. Take me? Take me where? Hagrid asked, unaware that he had perfectly mirrored Besh's thoughts. Not Azkaban prison, shouted Hagrid. Another knock on the door interrupted him, and this time it was Tristina's turn to clamp her own mouth shut. Besh's eyes narrowed as Lucius Malfoy and Takama Weggenstraw entered. Hagrid defensively stood in front of Tristina. Already here, Fudge? Good, said Lucius smoothly. What are you 2 doing here? Get out of my house! Hagrid bellowed. You tell them, Hagrid, Besh thought. Believe me, I take no pleasure in being inside your... Besh saw Harry and Ron back up as Lucius approached them. Do you call this a house? He asked quietly. Ron snarled, but Harry silenced him. No, I simply called to the school and was told the headmaster was here, Lucius said. And what did you want with me? Asked Dumbledore. Well, with 3 attacks already having occurred, I'm afraid the other governors and I feel you have... Lucius pulled out a scroll of parchment. Lost your touch. A smile spread across Lucius's face. You take Dumbledore away, and the Muggleborns won't stand a chance. Mark my words, there'll be killings next! Hagrid shouted. Besh fidgeted in response, wanting to give these men a piece of his mind, but recognizing they couldn't know he, Tiff, Harry, and Ron were watching the scene unfold. Calm yourself, Hagrid, said Dumbledore. If the governors desire my removal, I, of course, will step aside. However, he approached Lucius. You will find that help will always be given at Hogwarts to those who ask for it. He smiled at Ron, Harry, Besh, and Tristina, who hid under the invisibility cloaks. Admirable sentiments. We shall miss your unique touch, Dumbledore, said Takama smoothly. As for me, I have simply come to collect my ill daughter. Here, a nasty smile crossed Takama's face. Tristina felt a growl rising in her throat, but Hagrid gently tapped her muzzle as if to remind her to stay quiet, and Besh rubbed his head against the side of her muzzle. I'd die before I let you get Tina back, Charles. Besh thought, taking a savage satisfaction in the fact that he could insult Takama without the man knowing. As last act of headmaster, Takama, I'm afraid I cannot permit you to remove Tinessa from the school, said Dumbledore. A strange power seemed to be radiating from him. Besh smirked. Told you so, Charles. Guardian or not, you see, I'm afraid Tinessa has all the family she needs at the moment. Again, Dumbledore seemed to stare through Tristina's invisibility cloak and smile at her and Besh. Also, I assure you, she is receiving the utmost care and attention given her current state. Takama glared, but nodded. Lucius bowed, and Dumbledore quietly left the cabin. Come, Hagrid, said Fudge, bowing Takama out. Well, he called. If anyone were to looking for some stuff, all they'd have to do would be to follow the spiders. That'd lead 'em right. Hagrid cleared his throat and started to collect his moleskin overcoat. Oh, and someone will need to feed Fang while I'm away, Hagrid added, then left his house with Fudge. Besh sighed and made a mental note to keep Fang fed. Once the door closed, Harry and Ron emerged from their invisibility cloak, and Tristina and Besh emerged from theirs. How dare he? She growled, white and silver sparks flying from her hands. Besh, a little surprised, now back in his normal state, placed his hand over Tiff's, barely wincing at the energy traveling through his hands from hers, and said, Don't worry, Tiff. We'll get Hagrid back. He's innocent. If Albus says he is, then he is. If we can't trust Albus Dumbledore, then who can we trust, right? He asked. Hey, look, said Harry, pointing to a trail of spiders leading out of the hut. Grabbing a lantern, Harry called to Fang. Then Harry, Ron, Tiffany, and Besh proceeded to follow the spiders into the Forbidden Forest. Hey, look, said Harry, pointing to a trail of spiders leading out of the hut. Grabbing a lantern, Harry called to Fang. Then Harry, Ron, Tiffany, and Besh proceeded to follow the spiders into the Forbidden Forest. With Tiffany using a Kai ball and Harry using his wand, the two cast as much light on the trail of spiders as possible. Ron, however, was determinedly stomping on their insectified breadcrumbs. Ron, Tiffany sighed, exasperatedly, if you keep stepping on them, there won't be any left to follow. I don't care, whined Ron. I hate spiders. Geez, you're more of a scaredy cat than Chasty. Tiffany sighed, eyeing Besh apologetically. Ron took offense to this and stopped complaining. For a time, anyways. When the two reached what appeared to be several large, close-growing trees, Ron picked up where he had left off. Guys, I don't like this. Guys, I don't like this at all, he said in a sobbing voice. Try that again. Guys, I don't like this. Guys, I don't like this at all, he said in a sobbing voice. Shush! Shush! Tiffany and Harry whispered as the two bent low to climb under a low-hanging tree root. Besh followed, gingerly picking his way over the spiders. When they entered the deeply rooted group of close-growing trees, Tristina looked around, confused. Why does this feel familiar? Ugh. Tiffany dropped to her knees, clutching her head. An image flashed across her mind. A sunlit village deep within Mablo Forest. Wooden huts. The smell of the earth. Hagrid. A deep voice boomed. Tiffany's eyes snapped open as her head cleared and she found herself back in the cluster of close-growing trees filled with spider webs. Shakily, and with Besh's help, Tiffany stood up. Hagrid, is that you? The voice called. We're friends of Hagrid's, Tristina called nervously. Fang began to bark as the footsteps came closer and closer. Tiffany clutched Besh's hand, which she felt trembling. She gave it a gentle squeeze, letting him know she was there to help him, as he was there to help her. You're Aragog, aren't you? Harry asked, gasping. Yes, boomed the spider. His voice seemed old and tired. Hagrid has never sent men into our hollow before. Hagrid's in trouble. Up at the school, there have been attacks. Harry explained as Ron, still whimpering still, looked around. Spiders as big as Buicks began to close in around them. They think Hagrid's doing all of this, like he did 50 years ago, finished Harry. That's a lie, Aragog roared. Hagrid never opened the Chamber of Secrets. So, you're not the monster? Tristina asked, listening as the spiders clicked the pinchers. No, I came to Hagrid from a distant land, in the pocket of a traveler. The monster was born inside the castle. The dead girl was found in a bathroom. I never saw any part of the castle, except the box in which Hagrid kept me. Hagrid brought me here when I was accused, and as you can see, my family has grown tremendously. Then what did kill that girl 50 years ago? Asked Besh, regaining his voice. We do not speak of it. It is an ancient creature we spiders fear above all others. Guys, Ron whimpered, pulling on Harry's sleeve. What? Ron! Tristina snapped. Moaning, Ron pointed upwards, and the two looked up. From the thousands of webs above them, spiders, some 1/4 the size of Aragog, descended upon them. Well, said Harry in a strangely high voice. Thank you. We'll just go. Go? Asked Aragog in a raspy, tired voice. Ron nodded, his face looking as if he were about to cry. I think not. My children do not harm Hagrid on my command, but I cannot deny them fresh meat when it wanders so willingly into our midst. Goodbye, friends of Hagrid, said Aragog, retreating into its cave. Besh snarled, exasperated. Oh, thanks, Aragog, he said sarcastically. It's nice to know we can always count on friends of Hagrid to help us when we need it. As though his words had angered Aragog, even more spiders showered down on them. Besh sighed as Ron grew closer and closer to the brink of a nervous mental breakdown. "Merlin, Ron," he muttered, before sliding his wand out of his sleeve and pointing it at Ron, saying, "Lumos Helio." Instantly, a huge beam of light, not unlike sunlight, shot out of the tip of his wand, arching everywhere and bouncing off everything, making the spiders hiss and retreat. As the light faded, Besh grabbed the now spider-free Ron and pulled him along and said, "Harry, Tiff, let's go. I don't think those Arrogites are all too happy with the trick I pulled." Almost as though in response, they could hear scuttering of legs over leaves, a veritable stampede. Just as they were about to be overtaken, suddenly, twin lights appeared, bathing the spiders in light once more and making them retreat once again. Harry and Ron started to laugh, and Harry said, "It's Mr. Weasley's car!" Sure enough, the same pale blue car that Besh, Tiff, Harry, and Tina had ridden into the burrow appeared, clattering and clanking. It pulled up next to them and opened its doors, and the 4 teens gladly clambered in. "That was a close one," Ron said as the door shut. Suddenly, the car started being battered this way and that, and one of the windows was broken by one spider's leg. Besh snarled and punched his fist into the body of the spider. It fell backwards, but not before Besh felt a searing pain glance up his arm from his hand, which suddenly felt like it was on fire and might fall off. Roaring like the wounded lion he felt like, he cradled his hand close to him as Ron placed the car in drive and floored it, saying, "Thanks, Besh. I thought that spider nearly got me." "You're welcome, Ron," Besh managed before roaring again. Soon enough, though not nearly soon enough for Besh, they had gotten out of the forbidden forest, and the Ford Angela gently propelled them out of it, and they landed on the soft grass, Besh snarling as his hand hit the ground. "Besh!" Tiffany cried, kneeling next to him and examining his hand. "Follow the spiders! Follow the spiders!" bellowed Ron as Tiffany helped Besh walk back up to the castle. "If Hagrid ever gets out of Azkaban, I'll kill him!" "He should be grateful we're still alive," Tiffany muttered to Besh in Keeson. Besh managed to nod before he winced again, but kept the roar of pain inside this time. Fang, meanwhile, had bolted out of the car door the first chance he got and into the house to cower inside his bed. "Exactly what have we found out?" asked Ron. Christina was about to answer when Harry answered for her. "That Hagrid never opened the Chamber of Secrets. He was innocent." While Harry and Ron went to bed, Tiffany took Besh to Madame Pomfrey. Thankfully, the matron never asked too many questions, and sighed when the matron told her he would have to stay overnight. "Madame Pomfrey, may I stay with him?" Tiffany asked. She felt partially responsible for Besh's injury, even if she wasn't. The matron agreed. The next morning, Tiffany, Besh, Ron, and Harry came down to breakfast to see the tables had been pushed aside, and a long table had been covered with blue and gold tapestry. Parading up and down the table was Lord Ego himself, Gilderoy Lockhart. "Gather round! Gather round! Can you all see me? Can you all hear me?" Dead silence met his questions. "Excellent," Lockhart whispered. "In light of the dark times currently upon us, Professor Dumbledore has allowed me to start this little dueling club in order to train you all up in case you ever need to defend yourselves, as I have on countless occasions. For full details, see my published works." Professor Lockhart then threw off his sash and tossed it to several fawning girls. Tristina merely rolled her eyes. "Now, let's have a volunteer pair." Lockhart's eyes scanned the crowd. "Potter, Weasley, how about you?" Harry began to make his way towards the stage. "Weasley's wand causes devastation with the simplest spells," interjected Professor Snape. We'll be sending Potter to the hospital wing in a matchbox." Ron turned a violent shade of red as Tristina growled, "Might I suggest someone from my own house? Malfoy, perhaps." Snape pointed at Draco, who began to clamber up onto the stage as Harry did the same. Besh watched with one eyebrow raised slightly as the two young boys managed to get onto the stage and met each other in the center of the stage. They said something to each other, but Besh couldn't quite hear. It sounded something like, "Scared, Potter? You wish." Then two of them pivoted on their heels and strode to opposite ends of the platform. Once they had gotten there, they turned back around again, wand poised over their heads in a manner reminiscent of scorpions. "Now then, boys," Lockhart said. As he did so, Besh's ears suddenly twitched, and he felt a little ripple in the room. Gone as quickly as it appeared, so Besh wasn't quite sure he'd felt anything. Neither Harry nor Malfoy had reacted to it, so Besh simply dismissed it to the back of his mind. "On the count of 3, cast your spells. Only to disarm now, remember. 1. Malfoy shifted a little. Harry didn't move. 2. Besh noticed Harry's eyes flash, as though in confusion, and his own brow furrowed. 3. Expelliarmus, Malfoy said, and the spell shot out of his wand towards Harry, who still hadn't moved. It was then that Besh felt another tiny ripple in the air, and said to Tiff, "Someone's using non-verbal magic, but who?" Tiffany only nodded towards Snape, who had an odd look on his face as Harry's wand flew out of his hand and became reanimated a moment later. Besh narrowed his eyes, and Lockhart said, "Well, well. Well done, Mr. Malfoy." Malfoy simply smirked, eyes gleaming as he looked at Harry, who simply continued to look confused and disoriented. "It looks like we'll need a new opponent for Mr. Malfoy." He trailed off as he scanned the room. Tiff leaned over to Besh and whispered, "I really don't want him to pick me. How about you, Miss Wagenstorth?" Besh would have smirked if Tiff didn't suddenly look so scared right at that moment. Mr. Lockhart, I don't think," Besh started, but Professor Lockhart gave him a hard glare, and he shut up in spite of himself. Now, Miss Wagenstorth, do come along," Lockhart said, pulling her rather forcefully up onto the stage. Besh sighed and opened his mouth to say, "You'll be fine, Tiff-chan. This is Moonbeam we're talking about." But as soon as Lockhart released Tiff, Malfoy shot a curse at her, knocking her backwards. Besh's fangs elongated and his pupils constricted to slits instantly, and he roared, sending the concentrated effort right at Malfoy. It had the desired effect, paralyzing the blonde involuntarily. Besh smirked as Tiff stood up and said, "Okay, Moonhead, you want to play? Let's play." And she then was up, firing a jinx at Malfoy that knocked him off his own feet and broke his paralysis. Snape picked Malfoy up and threw him back onto the stage, and Malfoy stumbled a little before pulling out his wand and saying a spell Besh didn't recognize, but sounded like Ecosophensortia. What shot out of his hand, Besh barely recognized as well. He looked at Tiff as she froze and muttered, "Ecosa." It was an odd snake-like thing with wings. He started as the Ecosa started to look back and forth between the two, and lunged. Besh flattened his ears and pounced on it, pitting it before it could hit anyone. The Ecosa immediately started to wrap its way around Besh's torso. Before it could start to constrict, however, Lockhart said, "Not to worry, young sir. I'll get rid of that for you." He waved his wand with a flourish and said, "Alerte! Ascendere!" The Ecosa immediately released Besh and flew into the air, before it fell back to the ground, seriously peeved now. Suddenly, Harry said, "Sashi?" As he stared at the Ecosa, seeming to be in a trance. The Ecosa seemed to be the same way, as Harry repeated it. "Sashi?" The Ecosa paused long enough for Snape to say disbelievingly, "Vipera. Ivanaska." The Icosa vaporized before the three teens' eyes, and everyone, Lockhart included, simply stared at Harry and Tiff. "You're a parcel mouth! Why didn't you tell us?" Ron demanded as he, Harry, Hermione, Tiffany, and Besh returned to the common room. Tiffany blushed silver as Harry said, "I'm a what?" "You can talk to snakes," explained Ron. "I know," said Harry. Then quickly backtracking, he said, "I accidentally set a boa constrictor on my cousin at the zoo once, but I bet loads of people here can do it." "No, Harry." "No, they can't. This isn't a very common gift," said Ron, shaking his head. "Harry, this is bad. There's a reason the symbol of Slytherin House is a serpent. Salazar Slytherin was a Parselmouth too." "Guys, Harry isn't a dark wizard. I understood him perfectly fine." Tiffany clamped her mouth shut as Ron turned towards her. "You understood him?" Tiffany gathered what little bravery she had left and said, "Yes, he told the Icosa to leave Besh alone." Said Besh, interrupting Ron, who was about to exclaim again, "I'm sorry to interrupt, but could someone tell me what that snake thing was?" he asked. Tiffany sighed. "It was an Icosa, Besh. Icosa are Quesa's natural enemies. It's been that way for centuries." Tiffany then looked exasperated at Harry. "It seems we're in for a rough ride," she sighed. Early at sunrise the next morning, as Tiffany went out to train, she spotted Harry and Ron sitting with Hermione, and Besh watching them as he sat next to Tina. He couldn't help but worry about the Quessa. It didn't seem fair that she had escaped her karma for a little while, only to become petrified. Besh was so caught up in his thoughts, he didn't notice as, somberly, Tristina finished fastening the final piece of armor to the base of her tail, and sat down beside Tanessa. "Wish you were here, Hermione," Besh heard Harry say sadly, bringing him out of his thoughts to notice Tina's sister. "We need you, now more than ever," Harry continued, emerald eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Same here, sis," Besh heard Tristina say in Keeson, nuzzling Tanessa's shocked, frozen face. Besh grabbed Tiff's hand and held it as she looked at Harry and Ron, who were staring at her. Tears poured down Tristina's face as she laid her head on her sister's petrified torso, sniffling. Besh moved to help her up, but Tiff started. Huh? She sniffed, sitting up. Reaching into her sister's robe pocket, Tiffany pulled out a piece of folded up paper. Besh looked at it curiously and muttered, "What do you suppose that is, Tiff? Maybe Tina or Hermione were onto something." Apparently, Harry had also found something crumpled in Hermione's hand and thought the same as Besh did. "Ron, Besh, Tiff," he whispered. "This is it. This explains." Ron wasn't looking at Harry. Harry followed Ron's gaze to see Tristina's eyes scanning the paper, mouthing the words as she read them, and Besh doing the same thing over her shoulder. "What are they saying?" Harry whispered. "I can't tell. I think it's in Keeson," Ron replied, looking at the note. "Akina, Tina," Tiffany finished, looking up as Besh mouthed the same thing. "Let me guess," Harry whispered. "More answers?" Tristina nodded, and Besh said, "A lot of answers, to questions I'd never even thought to ask." "This explains why Dad wanted Tanessa so badly," Tristina whispered. "He didn't want us to..." Besh was about to prompt Tiff to say more, but suddenly he noticed what she must have, that Madame Pomfrey was coming, and she had her time to show the equal students look on her face and in her walk. "Go along, you're doing these people no good standing around here," shooed Madame Pomfrey. "It's no use talking to a petrified person." "Yeah, that doesn't mean we don't want to spend time with them," Besh muttered as the four of them were bustled out of the hospital wing. "Of all the fearsome beasts that roam our lands, None is more deadly than the basilisk. Death awaits anyone who meets this giant serpent's eye. Spiders flee before it. Ron, Tiff, Besh, this is it, said Harry, after he'd read the page that had been crumpled in Hermione's hand. Tiffany and Besh followed along, listening to Harry. The monster in the Chamber of Secrets is a basilisk. That's why I can hear it speak. It's a snake. But, said Ron, if it kills by looking at you, then how come nobody's dead? He asked. Harry, Ron, Besh, and Tiffany looked out at the inky black night. They saw their reflections staring back at them. Because nobody did look it in the eye, said Harry as the others listened in. Hermione had the mirror, said Harry, ticking the victims off with his fingers. Justin must have seen through nearly headless Nick, and Nick got the full blast of it. But Nick's a ghost, he couldn't die again. Colin... Harry ran his fingers through his hair. Colin saw it through his camera. And what about Tina and Mrs. Norris? Asked Besh. Neither of them had a mirror or a camera, Harry. Tiffany looked worriedly to Harry. Tina's hands were up, and her face was scrunched up like she was concentrating on something, said Harry, thinking back. She was forming a Kai shield. So she saw the basilisk through the shield. The shield got the full blast of it, and she only got petrified. Tiffany gasped, putting her hand to her mouth and looking at Besh. There was a lot of water on the floor that night, said Harry thoughtfully. Mrs. Norris must have seen the basilisk's reflection. But a great bloody snake. Somebody must have seen it, said Ron. Harry turned the paper towards Ron, Besh, and Tiffany. Hermione's answered that one too, said Harry grimly, pointing to a word written in Hermione's handwriting. Pipes. Pipes! Exclaimed Besh, looking around. It's been using the plumbing. So what about you, Tiffany? You said you found a piece of paper too, Harry asked, turning to the Quessa. Yeah. You said you'd figured out why your dad wanted Tina so bad, added Ron. Tiffany looked at the letter and translated it into English. Dear Sparky, I think I'm getting strong. Dear Sparky, I think I'm getting as strong as you now. Hermione said she is going to the library to look up something. I'm heading out to the field to train. I hope next year we'll be able to spar sometime. See you later. Love, Tina. Besh grabbed Tiffany and supported her as she clutched her head, groaning. Tiff! Harry gasped, dropping to his knees to see into her face. Tiffany, are you... Tiffany's eyes flashed so they appeared bright and lively, but then faded back to dull and hopeless. I'm fine, Ron, said Tiffany, straightening up and releasing Besh. Yeah, that's why Dad wanted to take her, said Tiffany said, standing up. He knew she was getting stronger. For some reason, he doesn't want us to train. He doesn't want us to become stronger. I think it has something to do with why Dad wanted to take Tina, Tiffany explained, rubbing her forehead. Anyways, said Tiffany, the pain completely gone now, I think Takama might have something to do with this. All students, please report to their common rooms immediately. All staff, please report to the second floor corridor. Professor McGonagall's voice rang through the castle. Tiffany, Harry, Besh, and Ron looked at each other, then hurried off to the second floor corridor. As you can see, Professor McGonagall said, motioning to the wall, the heir of Slytherin has left another message. The teachers turned to look at the message. The creature has taken someone into the Chamber of Secrets. The students will have to be sent home, Professor McGonagall said sadly. So sorry, dozed off. What have I missed? The teachers glared at Gilderoy Lockhart as he pranced onto the scene. A girl has been taken into the Chamber of Secrets, Gilderoy. Your moment has come. A girl has been taken into the Chamber of Secrets, Gilderoy. Your moment has come at last, snarled Professor Snape. I don't understand, Lockhart stammered. Weren't you just saying in the staff room that you have known all along where the entrance to the Chamber of Secrets is? Asked Snape. Yes, Yes, of course, said Lockhart, still sweating. Well, very well. Then we'll leave you to deal with this, Gilderoy. Your skills, after all, are legend, said Professor McGonagall, smiling. Yes, I'll just be in my office, getting ready, stammered Lockhart. He then turned to leave. And that does it for this part of Book 2, Tina's Tale. Sorry about my voice breaking at a few points. I still need to learn to warm up before I do things like this. Thank you all so much for watching. If you liked the video, please like and comment down below. I really do appreciate it. Take care of each other. God bless you all. And I'll see y'all later. We're getting close to the end, guys. It's getting good. It's been good.